Okay, so let's look at the question of why someone would gravitate to an ideological belief system. Liberalism is allegedly a neutral game. It is silent, absolutely silent on the question of the good. What is the good life for you? Liberalism provides a framework that's agnostic on that issue. And so you have the free market capitalism. You can pursue wealth and fame, but it still doesn't answer the question of meaning. Liberalism leaves it up to you to provide purpose and meaning in your life. And for most of Western European, American, Canadian history, that sense of meaning and purpose wasn't becoming rich. It was religious tradition, predominantly Christianity and, of course, Judaism, but predominantly Christianity. Now, we're finding that the religious beliefs in traditional Christianity are rapidly disappearing. More and more people are gravitating towards atheism, and atheism doesn't scale. There could be very many decent, moral atheists and who have a sense of meaning and purpose in their life. Typically they're bound with strong family and friendship ties. They don't need this ideology. But atheism doesn't scale. You can go from one person to 10 people to 100 people, but when you start talking in the thousands, in the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands, the millions, and the billions, atheism doesn't scale. People need a sense of overarching meaning to their lives, to endure the suffering and the hardship and loss that life entails. And so you have various, and sometimes it can be completely accidental in terms of what ideology you gravitate towards. Now, if you're a young Muslim man from an upper middle class family in Europe, you might be socially alienated, feel like an outsider, and Islam resonates with you. You have a community that has Islamic traditions, although not militant. And in fact, a startling fact is that very often it's a second and third generation European Muslims who gravitate to this militant, theocratic Islam of Muhammad. Their parents have done a good job of fitting in and accommodating and integrating. Second, third generations, these are the ones, because capitalism, the free market, doesn't answer the question of meaning. It was not supposed to answer the question of meaning and purpose, nor was liberalism. And fascism, and as I say, Islam is fascism in religious garb. I mean, there is absolutely no question. The beheadings, the stonings, the drowning of women's identities in a cloth bag, sawing off of limbs, this is fascism. And it exerts a totalitarian control over every aspect of your life. What you eat, who your friends are, absolutely everything. And so, communism, it is utopian dreaming. We can resolve all of the earthly contradictions, the poverty, the despair, the wealth inequalities, and live in a socialist utopian paradise. Except you can't. Every single attempt to bring heaven on earth has brought hell. Absolute totalitarian control, murder, torture, slave labor camps across the board. These totalitarian ideologies, they're all absolutely poisonous. The root cause of terrorism. Leftists perpetually ask you to look at the root causes of Islamic terrorism. And of course, as in every other issue, they are disastrously wrong. It's an ideology, it's not oppression. In the face of the most unimaginable terrorist atrocities, a common reaction among elite leftists is to assume that these acts have to be the result of people having been grievously oppressed. Only somebody brutally oppressed could ever commit such violence. In intelligence circles, this is known as mirror imaging. You imaginatively place yourself in the place of the enemy, and what would you do if you were them? In this case, our leftist warriors for justice, and for good reason, can't imagine ever engaging in such murderous violence, and so they believe that only unendurable suffering could have produced such resentment and such hatred to compel the terrorist violence. The more horrific the violence, the more presumed oppression. We witnessed this after 9/11, when numerous credulous celebrity intellectuals identified American foreign policy as the root cause of this mass horror. Look at what we've created. The poverty, the unemployment, the lack of education. They have no other voice than terrorism. Apart from the manifest immorality of such an argument, it is empirically false. The argument is immoral because no amount of oppression on the part of one group gives you license to deliberately target and murder innocent civilians. When a group deliberately kills innocent people, this is a clue to you that they are on the side of evil. This should not really be a difficult point to grasp. I'm actually a little embarrassed at having to point this out to adults. This argument is also empirically false in assuming, as leftists inevitably do, that these events are to be explained in terms of alleged root or structural causes. As J.M. Berger notes, this idea has been repeatedly empirically discredited. For example, in 2016, 2 studies found that recruits to the ISIS battlefield were more likely to come from higher economic than lower economic countries. They were privileged kids, predominantly. Another study of more than 4,000 Muslim radicals found that the radicals had, on average, a standard of education considerably higher than the general population. And when you check out the biographies of the 9/11 attackers, these were well-educated, upper-middle class, murderous villains. They weren't oppressed goat herders in Yemen. Nonsense. Done.
Done. I have some questions.
Okay.
Answer quickly.
Why would young men from well-established families, well-educated, materially well-off, choose to join these terrorist groups? Nihilism. These are young men, socially disaffected, looking for a purpose and a meaning in their life. And Sam Harris, I believe, uses the phrase a sexual James Bond or a religious James Bond. You can go out and kill and rape and enslave and be a moral hero. And it is this absence of meaning that is driving people to this social justice movement. The social justice movement, as I've argued, is a religion replacing religion. People need a sense of overarching meaning in their lives. Life is hard. Life entails suffering, disappointments, and loss. And an ideology speaks to that need. So for disaffected Muslim men and women, this ideology is a pre-written script to provide them that meaning.
Is social justice and Islam the same?
No, social justice and Islam, communism, fascism, these are not the same ideologies. Although, as I've spoken about earlier, fascism is a cousin of socialism. Hitler was a socialist. The Nazi Party is the National Socialist German Workers' Party. He was strongly influenced by Benito Mussolini, the founder of fascism. And Mussolini fused socialism with fascism. Fused socialism with nationalism, you get fascism.
Okay, I have another topic then.
Sorry, just to finish the point. So, these totalitarian ideals, they are not the same. They have different worldviews. Sometimes they're related, sometimes they're unrelated. But these are totalitarian views, giving people a sense of overarching meaning and purpose, and there is no question that the social justice zealots, the Antifa fascists, are motivated by a widespread phenomenon. Their lives are not the result of external oppression. There's been a problem, particularly in the Arab world, but in the Muslim world overall. When you look at the economic realities and the social realities, they are inhibiting economic growth. Portugal, in 1 year, translates more works into their language, into Portuguese, than the Arab world has done in something like 70 years. So the economic privation that people in the Muslim world are feeling, it's the product of their failed policies and their cultural commitments. And in terms of why they're doing it, it is no accident. It's the ideology. Islam is fascism and social garb. And I have several Muslim friends. None of them support this militant, theocratic ideology. I'm speaking of the Islam that Muhammad preached. Muhammad preached, and he didn't just preach it, he practiced it. I've talked about this elsewhere. How is it that ISIS could justify sexually enslaving Yazidi girls, sexually enslaving them, and their beheadings, and their killing in the name of Allah? Because Muhammad did exactly that. Muhammad had sex slaves. Muhammad engaged in plenty of beheadings, and the stoning, and the genital mutilation. This is in the Islamic world. And I also know that the genital mutilation, not all Muslims practice it. That is true. It was added on because it fits in with the patriarchal tyranny that is very common in the Muslim world. That explains the motivation. And why would people from the upper middle class families be more inclined to join? I think...
Don't say join.